Welcome to another lesson in chromatic harmony. In this video, we're going to discuss common tone diminished seventh chords. We'll learn what they are, what they sound like, how they function, and how to recognize them. To do this, we'll work through a couple of excerpts from the Romantic era. First, let's review what we know about fully diminished seventh chords. A fully diminished seventh chord is a four-note chord built entirely out of minor thirds. Because of this, you'll recall, it's symmetrical with respect to the octave. So far, all the diminished seventh chords we've seen were built on the leading tone of some local key. As they resolve to the local tonic, all the chord tones move by step. When we saw enharmonic modulations using fully diminished seventh chords, the trick was that a new note in the chord was treated as a leading tone. And even then, all the chord tones move by step in the resolution to the new tonic. As we move forward and distinguish these situations from the common tone diminished seventh, it's important to remember that leading tone fully diminished seventh chords have dominant function and no tones in common with the chord they resolve to. So what's different about common tone diminished seventh chords? Well, as you might deduce from their name, these are fully diminished seventh chords that do share a tone in common with the chord they resolve to. That common tone will always be the root of the following chord. Common tone diminished seventh chords don't have an inherent tonic, dominant, or predominant function. They serve only as embellishments to strong harmonies like 1 or 5. Since they don't have a function of their own, they don't receive a Roman numeral. Instead, we abbreviate the name as CT diminished 7. Let's examine a common tone diminished seventh chord in action. Here we have a reduction of the opening progression of Brahms's Third Symphony, which we heard at the beginning of this video. The progression begins and ends on tonic, and maintains a tonic pedal in the bass. In measure 2, we see a B diminished seventh chord over the F bass. Because this fully diminished seventh chord includes the tonic pitch, which holds over as it moves into a tonic chord, this is a common tone diminished seventh chord. Take note that this label does not respond to inversion. Since the diminished seventh chord is symmetrical with respect to the octave, and it doesn't have a directed function here, the way that the chord is spelled really doesn't matter very much. For instance, Brahms could have written a G sharp instead of an A flat, and it would have no change on the harmonic function. So since none of the pitches is really functioning as a root, no matter which note is in the bass, we always just label it with a diminished 7. One more thing to point out here, while these tonic pitches hold as common tones, all of the other tones still move by step. As we'll see, that stepwise motion is very typical for these chords, and it's because they are used as voice-leading embellishment. Let's hear this progression one more time, this time in a keyboard texture. See if you can hear out those common tones and the stepwise motions as the common tone diminished seventh resolves. Let's look a little bit more at this symphony opening. After listening, pause the video and take a few moments to assign a Roman numeral label to each of these opening measures. Okay, here are some of the labels, but I want you to notice these two measures in particular. Both have the exact same notes, a B fully diminished seventh chord with an F in the bass. But did you give them the same label? In fact, the first one, as we just saw, moves to tonic, holding F as a common tone. This is, of course, our common tone diminished seventh chord. The second one, however, acts as a leading tone fully diminished seventh chord, tonicizing 5. Notice how all of the notes move in the resolution. This is therefore 7 diminished 4/3 of 5. This example teaches us that you'll never know if a fully diminished chord is a common tone or a leading tone diminished seventh until you find out where it resolves. In the Brahms example, the common tone was held in the bass, which made it rather clear what was happening harmonically. While this is common, it isn't always the case. So for our next example, we'll look at this excerpt from Tchaikovsky's Fifth Symphony. The section is in A major. The first chord here, with A sharp, C sharp, E, and G, appears at first glance like a 7 diminished 7 of 2, especially because the bass moves up by half step to 2, as if it were a leading tone. However, the second chord is not 2. It's an E7 chord, 5-4-3. We can see this E held over as a common tone in an inner voice. Therefore, the first chord was, in fact, a common tone diminished seventh. This progression repeats in the next two measures. But how about these last two measures? Again, we have what appears to be leading tone motion in the bass, a B sharp diminished seventh chord leading up to a C sharp. But as you can see, this is not a C sharp chord. It's a 1-6, and we have the common tone A here in an inner voice. So once again, we'll designate this as a CT diminished 7. Let's listen to the excerpt one more time and see if you can hear out those inner voice common tones. It'll be a little bit more difficult this time as they're buried inside the texture. If you don't catch them the first time, go back a few seconds and give it another shot. So in this Tchaikovsky excerpt, we saw that two different chords are given the same common tone diminished seventh label. This is because what that label tells us, once again, is that it's a chord with fully diminished quality, that it shares a tone with the root of the following chord, and that it is non-functional, serving only to embellish the subsequent 1 or 5 chord. This completes our video introduction to common tone diminished seventh chords. I hope you go forth and put your new knowledge of this really lovely harmonic embellishment to good musical use. Thanks for watching.